Hi, and good afternoon. My name is Amy Celico. I will be your moderator this afternoon, talking about the Belt and Road Initiative and what kind of opportunities and maybe some challenges it could be presenting, not only for the countries engaged in the Belt and Road Initiative, but in a geopolitical sense of the increasing competition among key stakeholders in the world. It's a real pleasure to be on this panel, and so thanks very much to the Milken Institute for inviting me to be here. I am a principal at a small advisory company called Albright Stonebridge Group, and our firm helps foreign companies navigate operating in foreign markets, and I, along with a Chinese counterpart, lead our firm's China practice. Increasingly, the advisory services that we provide to our clients includes helping them better understand and participate in the Belt and Road Initiative, and also build partnerships with Chinese entities on specific Belt and Road projects, both in China and in third country markets. And I think, as all of us here realize, China's expansive Belt and Road Initiative is one of President Xi Jinping's core priorities. He's extolled the Belt and Road, of course, as the project of the century. It's very well resourced. It's got a whole of government concept for regional and economic connectivity, and as this panel is going to explore, it can bring out both cooperative and competitive elements among major players on the global stage. 5 years since its inception in 2013, what the Belt and Road Initiative means in practice is still coming into focus. But today, I have with me on this stage 4 experts who can help us all better understand Beijing's aspirations for Belt and Road Initiative within China, and of course here in Europe, to answer the basic question posed by this session. Is the Belt and Road Initiative an opportunity for Europe to help connect China through Central Asia to the continent and provide much needed infrastructure, finance, and even green project funding? Or does this initiative pose a threat to free trade, the existing international rules-based economic system, and European interests, as well as alignment between the US and Europe on China's role in the world? Indeed, this infrastructure and connectivity initiative does have security implications for Europe, the United States, and many of our partners. In a negative view of the Belt and Road Initiative, some in the US charge that China is using Belt and Road Initiative to challenge US and allied interests and the international rules-based order, predicated on the idea that open markets and democratic, transparent governance is meant to be the system for the 21st century. Perhaps China is trying to drive a wedge between the US and Europe on these interests. Rhetoric aside, today we're here to talk about what the Belt and Road Initiative really is and how it is impacting Europe already. We can also discuss how American unilateral policies may be pushing the EU and China towards one another, with Belt and Road as a case study of the opportunities and tensions inherent in that cooperation. You have the bios of my distinguished fellow panelists, who combined have great perspectives on Europe, China, regional infrastructure needs, and security concerns, and are coming here from Beijing, London, and Washington, D.C. Let me introduce to my left Councillor Guo Chen-Tao, who's a Chinese diplomat currently based here in London. He's also served, he's currently the head of the policy and research section at the Chinese embassy here in London, and he's served at China's foreign ministry as well as at China's mission to the United Nations over the past 5 years since the Belt and Road Initiative has been in existence. To his left is Ekaterina Miroshnik, who is a London-based Russia and Central Asia infrastructure expert and practitioner. She currently serves as the Director, Head of Infrastructure, Russia and Central Asia at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. To my right is Dr. Evelyn Farkas, who is a Washington, D.C.-based expert on European security and American foreign policy. She's had significant policy experience working in the U.S. government and is currently president of Farkas Global Strategies and a senior fellow at both the German Marshall Fund and the Center for Naval Analysis. And to her right is Karim Al-Wadi, a board member of Beltway Group. We share a few friends. He's based in Beijing and is an academic, China specialist by training, an entrepreneur, and also an advisor to the Chinese government on the Belt and Road Initiative. So to kick things off, I thought I would ask each of the panelists a question. I'll allow them, of course, to comment on one another's responses, and then hopefully we'll get some questions from the audience to have a good and engaging dialogue. So, Ekaterina, I'll start with you for a European perspective. It seems the EU's position on the Belt and Road Initiative is based on the premise of wanting to deepen cooperation and engagement with China rather than an attempt to isolate China. And it seems the Belt and Road Initiative has the potential to be hugely positive so long as it adheres to international requirements and standards and complements the European Union's relatively new connectivity strategy. So, how are you seeing Belt and Road Initiative projects from the EBRD? What's the EBRD's position on it? And is it different from the way EBRD views the EU's connectivity strategy, connecting Europe and Asia?
Okay, thank you, Amy. If it's possible to put my slide on, thank you. So first of all, about EBRD, we are the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and I would like to thank the Milken Institute for the opportunity to speak here. So we are the largest investor in Central Asia, outside of oil and gas sector. And we see lots of opportunities. Actually, we positively view the BRI, in this area and in these markets. If we discuss what is the Belt and Road Initiative, it's just an idea. Is there a list of projects behind it? Actually, no. There are no projects. It's just an idea to build more infrastructure, to modernize the existing infrastructure, to allow the movement of goods from China to Europe, to make it faster, and also from Europe to China. From EBRD perspective, we think it's an opportunity for the region of Central Asia. People in this region, they will benefit. But also, China will benefit, and Europe will benefit as well. So lots of opportunities for investments, and also for the benefits from transit. In particular, Kazakhstan is one of those markets that will benefit a lot. But other countries in Central Asia as well, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, even Turkmenistan will benefit from all these investments. This region, we have 73 million people. And GDP growth is quite high. It's 4 or 5% per annum. It's quite good. It's quite an interesting area for investments. Also, Kazakhstan is BBB rated. Again, an interesting country for investors. So what we've seen for the last couple of years, we've seen a number of projects that EBRD involved in. Western China, Western Europe Highway, Dushanbe-Uzbek Border Road project that EBRD did together with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, a new kid on the block in terms of MDBs. We also invested in Southwest Corridor Road in Kazakhstan and did a number of projects with Kazakh Railways. What's next? PPPs are next for that region. We see lots of interest from investors, as I said, because in particular to Kazakhstan because of its BBB rating, which is still investment grade, but also to Uzbekistan. And we see changes in the legislation in those markets to allow more investors to some improvements in the investment climate. Kazakhstan, again, is a pioneer in the region and is now ranked 36 in the World Bank's ranking of doing business, which is really good. In terms of PPPs, lots of Chinese interest. The Almaty Ring Road, which is also called Bakat, was tendered a couple of years ago, and we saw Chinese participants in the tender. Just a couple of days ago, we had the first phase of the bid for their Almaty light rail. And we had, I think, 9 participants there, and out of these 9 participants, 6 are from China. So lots of interest from the Chinese companies. So then not necessarily win those tenders. For example, on Bakat, they couldn't win because they couldn't price the bid properly. Again, because the Chinese investors, they're more in the construction. They know how to basically price EPC contracts, and they're not well aware how to price a PPP and how to become an investor, but they're learning, and they want to invest in these markets. They see potential. And again, we as EBRD, we welcome, for us, we are neutral. We welcome the Chinese investors, we welcome the European investors or the US investors. And by the way, US is the single major shareholder of EBRD. US has 10%. Of course, EU countries altogether have majority. But again, we welcome all investors. So the PPP projects, they are next. After the Almaty Light Rail, we expect Almaty Rail Bypass. The deadline for PQ is in February next year. Then there will be roads in the south of Kazakhstan, again done under the PPP scheme. And more to follow in various other sectors like hospitals and utilities, etc. So lots of projects to be PPP'd. Uzbekistan is trying to follow the Kazakh route and do PPPs, roads, airports, are being discussed by the government. They're also trying to introduce PPP legislation in Uzbekistan, so more projects to come. Also, Kazakhstan announced privatizations. It will take a few years for those assets to be privatized. Air Astana, the largest regional airline, is going to be first. They plan an IPO next year. A few other assets, Kazmor Transflot, Kazakh Freight rail operator is going to be also privatized, and could be some airports. Again, Uzbekistan is trying to follow the Kazakh route. They're also announcing some privatization. But again, it will take some time for them, perhaps a few years, 3-4 years, to basically go through the whole process. But they already started doing some first steps. For example, in the aviation sector, they are unbundling, the airline from the airports. Now they have 2 separate companies, so it will take some time to do it, and to proceed to privatizations. But, these countries are doing some steps to attract investors, to attract investments from China, but also, from other parts of the world. And actually, we, as EBRD, would welcome more investors because we could support them, doing projects in these countries and in this market. Again, in our view, it is for the benefit of everyone. So this BRI initiative.
And just to put it in context, so 6 years ago, how engaged was China in this region? So prior to BRI being a priority initiative?
We saw mostly bilateral loans from China to those governments. Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, in some cases Kazakhstan as well. Now China is more active on the private side. So Chinese companies are active. CITIC, Silk Road Fund, they're active. And of course, much more focus on investments in Central Asia. There is economic rationale there. Because, for example, the railway, if you check the railway, if the goods can be moved faster from Western China to Western Europe, so some freight will go from sea or from air to rail. It's not only about hard infrastructure, about soft infrastructure as well. So some soft barriers need to be eliminated to basically allow this fast movement. Again, it cannot be done tomorrow. It will take some time. But as soon as it's done, it will become much easier for the goods to come from China to Europe. But also China will benefit because some of the goods like Norwegian salmon can go from Norway to China, by rail. Now it's impossible. And, in the future it will be possible. So it's, again, huge potential, for example, in the rail sector.
Albright Stonebridge Group is assisting one of our clients, a American corporate actually, and to be one of the earliest adopters of using the railway system that connects China to Europe. And the Chinese government has given terrific incentives to this company to use the rail system, and it is, much more economical, including with the incentives, but faster. And so that connectivity really is helping get products manufactured in China to Western Europe, thanks to this connectivity that simply didn't exist through this portion of Central Asia in the past. I am going to now ask a question of Councillor Guo. Councillor Guo, I was a diplomat based in Beijing and in Shanghai also, and I recall in my role as a diplomat, a lot of the work that I did was explain American policy and try to promote, of course, American commercial interests while I was living in China. And so I'm sure that must be part of your remit now.
Sure.
In London. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how the Chinese government here in London talks about the Belt and Road Initiative, and including, responds to some criticism of the Belt and Road Initiative about whether it's offering as many opportunities for Europeans as well as for China.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And it's my honor to be here. And actually, I have been thinking about several days about what kind of key message I will bring here. So when I see the theme of this conference, the idea comes to my mind. That is, the world will be better if we build the Belt and Road Initiative together, hand in hand. And with what Ekaterina just has introduced, because she is on the ground, so actually she told me a lot of stories I didn't know before. So actually that gives me more confidence about that. And regarding the Belt and Road Initiative, I'd like to say a little more about it. We are welcome actually criticisms and constructive suggestions based on facts. And that's not a problem. So I'm welcome any discussion with panelists or audience later. And because I joined this initiative at a very early stage, and I was actually went back to China to serve in foreign ministry, joining this project in early 2014. So actually, not late, only several months after we have this kind of proposal. So I know how it is formulated into the present. And actually, at the beginning, I think I agree with Ekaterina. It is an idea, and it is inspired by Asian Silk Roads. And because when our president visited Kazakhstan, he proposed the land belt. It was hugely welcomed, actually beyond our expectations. 1 month later, when he went to Indonesia to attend the APEC meeting, he proposed the sea belt. And the same very, very huge welcome. So that makes us think, why not to join these two proposals together and call it One Belt, One Road, Belt and Road, or BNR, and so that depends on how to translate it. So why I say this? So I say actually there's no roadmap at the beginning. So that's why my President Xi has said at the beginning. Actually, the Belt and Road Initiative is compared to a drawing. Actually, it is only a sketch. And after 5 years now, or during the process, we need to focus more on detailed drawing. That's the first point I like to make. The second point I like to share with you my experience, because just now both of you have mentioned the railway transportation. So that reminds me a lot about my experience on working on this issue. And actually, the first railway connection from China to Europe is from Chongqing of Sichuan province. No, Chongqing now is a municipal city. Chongqing of west of China. It started in 2011, 2 years before the proposal. And from time to time, gradually more and more Chinese cities joined in. And more than 10 cities, they have their own connections from their city to Europe, maybe same city or different cities. They have their own names. And it is actually, it's not the design of the central government. It is very, very much from the root level, from local government, from local business, because there is a gap between sea transportation and air transportation. Air transportation is quicker, but more expensive. And sea one is cheaper, but slower. So that's actually the beginning. And when we have this Belt and Road Initiative, we think, we make a lot of investigations to see whether to support this one or not. And we talked with local governments, local businesses. We work with our colleagues in other departments of the central governments. Actually, we even went to the border to see where it is happening. For example, like the border between China and Mongolia, because the width of the railway is different. So we go there to see whether there's room to expand. You know, if there's too limited, then there's a problem. So after a lot of investigations, we made the conclusion that this kind of transportation method has great potential. And at the moment, there are a lot of things, because different governments have their own views, different places have their own ways of organization. So we make some efforts to uniform them, and for example, like give them all call name like China Railway Express. Before, each city has their own names. But there are some, exemption a little. For example, like Chongqing, they use China Express, China Rail Express, but following them with brackets, they keep their name from Yu means the city, Chongqing via Xinjiang to Europe. So that is, that is the second point I'd like to say. The third point, because the time is limited, I'd like to just make a very brief one. And actually, we know, as I said, because there's no low mat at the beginning. So we welcome all the suggestions and even criticisms based on facts, like China's reforming and opening up. Our attitude is like crossing the river by filling the stones. So we welcome all the parties join in. That's why we say we propose. It is an open proposal, and we welcome everyone to come in to have joint communications, to build it together and share the benefits together. Thank you.
That's really helpful. I think I'm going to skip over to Karim now, but for an on-the-ground perspective, and a little bit following up with what we just heard from Councillor Guo. You're in China, you're an entrepreneur, you're advising the Chinese government on this Belt and Road Initiative that, frankly, a lot of us see as kind of this amorphous thing, but there are real concrete projects that are engaged there. There's also some real criticism of the Belt and Road project. And I know that earlier this year, there was a report that was sent by 27 out of 28 EU ambassadors stationed in China that were suggesting, their criticism was suggesting that the Belt and Road Initiative's projects benefited Chinese companies, the Chinese government, at the expense of local economies. I'm wondering if you have any color on that criticism that was emanating from within China, but then also if you could continue to talk about the concrete ways that Belt and Road Initiative is actually enhancing connectivity.
Okay. Well, first of all, I looked at this report. I questioned the authenticity of this report. I mean, Europe East Europe, the 16+1 mechanism. Out of the 16 countries in the Eastern Europe, 9 of them signed already Belt and Road Agreement. Greece is also part of the Belt and Road Agreement. I think, I'm not giving a secret here, maybe Portugal in 2-3 days will sign as well the Belt and Road Agreement. So it's, there is more than 100 countries and 28 international organizations already joined the Belt and Road Agreements. So half of the world is there on the question of whether Europe is concerned about it. Of course, there is concerns, and I think it is also an opportunity. Okay, let me put it in this way. I think within 5 years, the biggest success of Belt and Road, that it pushed other countries to initiate their own Belt and Road versions. So like, let's say Europe now, they have the European Belt and Road Initiative. Here is where I think the opportunity today is. I came here to Beijing preparing for this session. I was more on the pessimistic side, challenge side. But after 2 days of positive injections by Mike Milken, let me talk about the opportunities here. On this, the key word will be, it's not about competition, it's about competition, right? It allows let's say, the global leaders to cooperate, not in the same level, maybe go on the third world, developing the most needed countries to push it. Well, I am an entrepreneur. I like to talk based on facts and numbers. Within these 5 years, what's related to with Europe, I think Europe can take an example of AIIB, where the bank it is a Chinese idea. However, England and India, most of the world countries already joined, are actively changing the path of this bank. Let me take also, for Europe to think about ideas, is Russia and China relations. Russia came from, its attitude for Belt and Road came from negative to neutral to positive. How this came? This came through direct, frank incentive talks where the concerns were addressed by the Russians to the Chinese. Chinese leadership listened to that, and as a result, for the first time, China has recognized Russia's interest in the Central Asia countries. Therefore, China was allowed, let's say, and actively participating in the Belt and Road. So Beijing does listen to the concerns. That's why I'm an example for Europe to have a frank talks with Beijing about its concerns within the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, in terms of the business, actually, Europe is already heavily involved. I mean, we have a lot of projects where Siemens, where big companies. I mean, Siemens already having sales of multi-billion sales because of the Belt and Road Initiative in Central Asia and Middle East. HSBC, as we're speaking, they have Belt and Road programs. It's a bank, Standard Chartered Bank. I think they announced before 2020, they will allocate $20 billion to support the Belt and Road. Today, as we're speaking, there is 11,000 freight trains connecting 45 Chinese cities with more than 40 cities in Europe through 15 countries, moving 920,000 containers. That's a lot of containers. Now, most of it is full, coming from China, but there is an opportunity for the European companies and business sector to fill up those containers, knowing that there will be around 600 to 700 million middle-class Chinese are eager to consume quality products. So this is an opportunity between Europe and China. Now, on terms of the third countries, how you are talking about examples, there is many, but let me take on the debt crisis, right? The debt trap that everybody is speaking about. And let me put an example where in Dubai, Khasian power project, this is a JV between Harbin Electric with GE executing a clean coal station, power station in Dubai, now financed by a consortium of Chinese bank sectors with Gulf banks on a model of BOO. Well, that it ease the financial pressure on the local budgets. So there is many of them happening, of these projects happening. China already invested in Africa billions and billions. It is generating 1/3 of the African power today, as we're speaking. The Chinese economist, famous economist Li Yingfu, he had a formula of every $100 invested in the infrastructure, there will be $70 of import. Now, 40% of this $70 will come from developed countries. This is Europe's opportunity. In addition, every $1 billion in infrastructure will bring an additional 2.5 billion of extra GDP with 50 to 80,000 jobs. So all of this, it's an opportunity to stabilize, let's say, or stabilize the areas around Europe, which is, Middle East and Africa. And I see where, after China is taking the risk, it solved the problem of the chicken or the egg first. Well, China took the risk now, and they invested in the infrastructure. That will stabilize the areas where the Europeans, the countries, they can come to the Middle East and they can Africa, and then make their roles in the develop the needed countries.
That's incredibly interesting, specific examples, and thanks for that. I think that 4 of us are sort of telling a very similar story here, focused on the opportunities. And so, Evelyn, I'm going to ask you to provide a different perspective for us. I mean, you've advised 3 former secretaries of defense. You're Russia's security expert. You've worked looking at security concerns that Europe faces, including, for example, Russia, and how that issue has sometimes divided the EU and the United States, particularly in this administration. So I'm really interested in your perspective on whether in this administration, or even more broadly, just among American security experts, is the Belt and Road Initiative seen as a threat, not only a broad threat for the United States, but maybe for the relationship between the EU and the United States?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much to the Milken Institute and everyone for including me in this panel. Yes, I mean, as you would imagine, as somebody who's spent, I guess, the first part of my career, 10 years, was not in defense security, but the last 20 years I've been working either in Congress, working actually Asia Pacific and other areas, and then, of course, more recently, back to Eastern Europe and Russia. And if you work defense issues, you tend to take a little bit more of a cautious, conservative approach. And so I think when it comes to the Belt and Road Initiative, certainly for those in the United States who are focused more on political, economic, defense issues, there are a lot of open questions. So in principle, of course, it's a positive thing that China wants to help develop infrastructure across the world, and that's something that we should all be doing together. The problem is the way that China's gone about it, and the reality that while we have a competition with China that's economic, we also have something of a political competition, because the United States and our allies in Europe, and that's Western Europe primarily, are focused on protecting our democracy, expanding democracy to Eastern Europe and other places where they're interested in being democracies, joining the Western democratic, economic, and political military institutions, so the EU and NATO. And to some extent, what China's doing throws into question the ability of these countries to work with us. And I'll give a concrete example in a minute. So the report, I think, that the EU representatives in Beijing put out recently does raise some concerns that are also American concerns. So the concern about the lack of sustainability, economic, political, social, financial sustainability is one that I think Americans looking at it from the outside, even looking at what's happening in Europe, are concerned. The debt trap has affected European countries, and the ones that are vulnerable are the ones in Eastern Europe who are in line trying to get into NATO or get into the EU or both. And so you have the example, concrete example of Montenegro, where they got funding based from China's Exim Bank, based on the Belt and Road Initiative, to fund a highway. 85% of the funding was provided, which sounds great in theory, but that's the equivalent. What they provided caused a debt that was the equivalent of a quarter of Montenegro's GDP. So they found themselves now in something of a debt trap, and certainly from the perspective of people in Brussels looking at Montenegro as one of the Eastern European countries that were at the front of the line or close to the front of the line. I would say Serbia is at the front of the line in that region, but Montenegro was close behind, certainly, especially since they had just become NATO members. Now this puts Montenegro probably much further back, maybe even than, well, I won't say Bosnia, but anyway, it causes grave problems. And from the US perspective, that runs counter to our political and economic interests in the region, because we would like Montenegro to be a more stable country, politically, militarily, and of course, economically. So I think it comes down to the way that China's approached some of these countries and some of the projects, and that's a very real example. Of course, outside of the region, we have the famous example of the Sri Lankan port, which now will be under Chinese control until 2116 or so because of the indebtedness, because of the debt trap. And we are very sensitive in the United States to ports and facilities that especially could be used by NATO countries or in NATO allied countries coming under sort of foreign control, if you will. And that's because of this question of the competition or where the relationship will go in the future. So there's a lack of fundamental trust because fundamentally as democracies, we wonder about what the non-democratic states, what their intentions are vis-a-vis us and our democratic allies. That's the fundamental problem that I don't think will be addressed anytime soon, although I think that there's an opportunity to shape, you know, as the counselor says, if as you cross the water and you feel the pebbles and you get the reactions, and if China can adapt and make changes that come more into line with the critiques in this letter. So in addition to the sustainability, you also had the reciprocity issue. So this was also thrown into relief by your mention of the goods going one way. I think one of the concerns also in Europe is that there's not the same, and America, that there's not the same market access in China, and it's not the same kind of, you know, open free market economy as in the United States and Europe. You still have large state-owned enterprises. You have a lot more state control and interference, which makes it then an uneven playing field for the West. And so I think that's why you saw the European response, this connectivity strategy that you mentioned, Amy, really highlighting, okay, first of all, we want level playing field, we want labor rights standards, and we want sustainability, environmental sustainability, because there's also criticism about the Pakistan projects on coal. We want environmental sustainability, we want financial sustainability. So they're laying out their demands and their concerns. And I think from the US perspective, we're watching this very closely because while we favor, of course, economic infrastructure projects, we don't want them to fuel the competition that we fear is developing, an unhealthy competition with China. So the question will be, how can we navigate this as we move forward so that China is sensitive to our needs or our interests when it comes to our alliances, in particular, of course, NATO allies and the European Union needs, because, of course, we see them as our economic allies.
Yeah, that's really helpful context. And as Karim said, we're going to see this in real time with President Xi Jinping being in Portugal today and tomorrow, and the real possibility that Portugal will be among the European countries that does formally join Belt and Road Initiative this week. Let's see how that works. I'd like to pick.
Spain said no just recently.
Exactly, just last week,
the big
before
Western
the G20.
Countries
exactly.
have all said no, thanks so far.
And
so far.
Yeah.
Right, it's an interesting and ongoing debate. I would like to pick up on one of just my final question before we open it to the audience. Of course, Belt and Road Initiative is an infrastructure initiative, but it's also a financing tool. And you were talking about sustainability, and so I would like to talk about what China is doing, particularly in Europe, to promote green bonds and sustainable investments. Your ambassador gave a great speech, I thought, last night here in London and talked about how much he's appreciative of London being a financial capital that has really opened itself to connectivity with China. And he talked about the issuance of green bonds years ago now. So just on sustainability and the Belt and Road Initiative, maybe, Councillor Guo, this is one area where China's hearing some criticism and is changing and trying to be actually a leader in some ways.
Yeah, and actually, I said I welcome the criticism, at least for our panel, to be more fruitful. Because of time limit, I will answer this at our next session. When answering the questions of the panel, I just focus what the green finance issue. And thank you very much, Amy, to make advertisement, if I can say, for what Ambassador, what he said. Actually, my ambassador is very active in promoting many things. Of course, UK-China relations and many specific issues. All of his speeches were on our website, bilingual, Chinese and English. So you are welcome, very welcome to read that. So I don't tell you the details. And regarding the green finance, as I know, actually, China is like a newcomer in green finance. And for example, like the green bond, China officially launched the green bond in 2016, only about 2 years ago. But within 1 year, we become the #1 in the world,
Wow.
accounting for 40% of green bond issued that year. The following year, 2017, China's bond market is still the world #1. Why? I think that reflects many things. Especially one is, the rapid progress of Chinese green technology to green industries, but also a very strong policy leading from central level to local governments. Maybe by 2020, we like to achieve a target named moderately prosperous society in all fields. That is our target. And there are two most important tasks. One is to reduce the main risks, especially the financial risks. And in other words, we have to strengthen the weakest links. The second one is to eradicate the poverty and to zero. I mean, completely. According to China's standard, our standard is 2,300 yuan per year, adjusted by PPP. It is a little higher than $1.9 of the World Bank. And the third one is to improve the environment, especially reduce the pollutant emission and overall improve the environment. This is the hard target, not soft target. That means if local government cannot complete this, I don't know, maybe the head of government will be fired or punished in our view. So I think all the governments are doing all their best to reach the target. So internally, we are promoting the green development very, very seriously. And coming back to Green Belt and Road, President Xi has said that we also promote Green Belt and Road. My understanding is actually that is, do we just now actually Evelyn has said like the coal problem. So actually, I think somebody said, are we building a black one or a green one? Actually, I don't think this is the real issue, because we can, coal is what we needed, and we cannot just like abandon coal over one night. If we abandon the coal now, I think many countries in the north, especially in the north hemisphere, will suffer the black snow, the white snow. That means the solution actually is to how to use clean energy, which is now more advanced and cheaper, and especially like the clean coal technology. So now we are doing very well. I mean, we are making all the efforts to do in this regards. And we also like to have like a cooperation with other countries in third places or third-party cooperation. We have a lot of cooperations with the UK in the fields of like green finance, and also with other countries, actually including with US. We have green fund, I think, green fund in the US, before this administration jointly proposed by the government.
Let's take a couple minutes to offer time for participants to raise questions, and I see a hand in the air.
Thank you. I'd like to ask specifically, Evelyn, you mentioned Hambantota, the Sri Lankan port, and the fact that the equity ownership has passed to China. There have been some accusations that the Belt and Road Initiative, particularly in Sri Lanka, and one or two other countries, Malaysia has been mentioned, that it was basically used as a front to fund political parties in certain countries. So basically a means for corrupt practices. Would you like to comment on that?
So that's a really interesting point. I think it gets again to the criticism that the EU ambassadors made and that others make, that the Chinese financial intervention in that way, in the way that they're financing these infrastructure projects, can undermine democratic values or values such as transparency and countering corruption in the instance that you just gave. So again, it's very important to make sure that there are good standards and that there isn't the sense that the Chinese government is taking advantage. Now, you gave an example, of course, where the local government is also taking advantage. And again, this is not something that the United States or our European allies would want to propose or support. So I think, again, the legal standards are important, and maybe that's what we need to focus on discussing. You know, what are the rules of the road for this project, in as much as the United States and European countries are working with China on it?
Karim?
Okay, well, it's a good question. It's just a matter of facts that China conducting business now in 182 countries. To criticize Belt and Road, usually taking the Sri Lanka's deal as well of few countries. Now, because of that, I actually went and I spent my time asking about the Sri Lankan port. What is the deal? First of all, basically how the Belt and Road, how to get funded by China. If you are, a businessman in India or in Sri Lanka, you have to list your project in the priority list of the local government. That will be basically applied for the Chinese, government to get funded. This is one. So this project China did not pick the port. It was chosen by Sri Lanka. Second, this is a JV between China, Chinese companies, and Sri Lanka's companies. Sri Lanka defaulted. The deal is 99 years, where Sri Lanka has the option, in the contract, has the option every year they will pay a certain amount to buy back the equity. So that was, just to answer about the Sri Lanka's deal about the port, where now the port is connecting, the current port is making money, and it's connected to 70 international ports around the world. Nobody talk about China now basically providing or solved electricity for 40% of Sri Lanka's population. This is, we need to be fair about when talking about deals and that. In Sri Lanka, yes, there is some issues, but just to put the point of the Sri Lankas, we need to look at facts more than the theory.
Very helpful. Any other questions from the audience? I guess I'd like to close this session out by, coming back to the premise of this discussion, which is, is the Belt and Road Initiative a threat or an opportunity for Europe? I mean, clearly, again, those of us who are working in China and on foreign investment issues see real opportunities in the Belt and Road Initiative. But that doesn't discount the fact that we have to make sure there are real standards and rules, and that China's efforts to enhance connectivity in the world don't undermine a rules-based system. I think that's where we're all sort of seeing there can be legitimate criticism, and sometimes that legitimate criticism can get overblown. I really was struck at APEC this year, the leaders' meeting in Papua New Guinea, where President Xi gave a speech and Vice President Pence gave a speech, and they had starkly different views, perspectives on China's infrastructure initiative. And I think sometimes that rhetoric undermines legitimate criticism. And so for those of us who want to see this investment succeed, I think, Councillor Guo, you've really said it well. China is listening to legitimate criticism and is willing to adjust its initiative so that it can be more successful in countries that actually want the investment. And those of us who are looking from the outside at how this investment is helping these local economies need to be cognizant of the needs. Yes.
Yeah, if I may actually, a couple of weeks ago we held a forum in Beijing on Central Asia with 700 participants from China attending. So, and the whole discussion was about standards. I think China is trying to change its image. All the companies which are doing business overseas, they want to adhere to standards, the European standards or international standards, best practice, whatever you call it. But there is this mood to basically to change and improve. And IBRD, for example, we don't support coal, and we basically support green investments. We target 40% of the business to be green, going forward. So, and the Chinese companies, they're trying basically to join. So, and the Chinese government, they're trying to change it. So, and I hope that going forward we'll see the results. And also this Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, their motto is lean and green as well. So again, we'll see it's happening, at least they're talking about it. So, and I hope we'll see the results soon.
Yeah, very, very quick. First, I think there are concerns from the European side, but I think to a large extent, especially according to the description of this panel, I think these concerns are exaggerated because it used officially denounced. I don't agree with that. For example, like you said, the Portugal case, let's wait and see. And also, just 3 days ago, when the two leaders of China and Germany met on the sidelines of the G20, the Premier of Germany, she said she is happy to see the port of Duisburg of Germany is participating in more projects of One Belt, One Road, and there are many other cases. That's the first point. The second point is actually, I think after the summit of several days ago between China and US, I think we are now more focusing on cooperation and more on building our relations on coordination, cooperation, and stability. We said as the defining features. Briefly speaking, China is not intending to use the Belt and Road Initiative as a platform to make strategic or geopolitical competition with the US. Actually, even at a very, very beginning, we made a lot of efforts to have US to join. And I have no time to explain many more, but because I am the participant of this, and even now, yes, US also has sent delegates to our last One Belt One Road International Cooperation Forum in Beijing, 2017 of May. And although the level is not so high, but we can, I think we can do it better in the future. And also, as we discussed last time, and we are not intending to compete with US like the leadership of this or that. We actually we like to see the Belt and Road Initiative, and we don't. In Europe, coming back to Europe, we don't want to force anyone to choose a side, because in our culture and philosophy, we don't see like if you are not my friend, you are my foe. There are many options in between, and we are seeing more and more positive signs in Europe when we have more communications and we know better each other. I quite agree with you with that. You see, there's a lack of trust. So that is maybe the sources of a lot of misunderstandings. I have no time to respond all your concerns, but I think if we take the opportunity, take the attitude as like more consultations, more coordinations, and listen to each other more, I think a lot of problems or misunderstandings will be solved, and we can do it together, even I think with the US, with all the countries in the world, to make these kind of initiative. Not only actually not only One Belt One Road. For example, like recently, US proposed for more funding to infrastructure building. I think we welcome that, because there's a very, very big gap in infrastructure building. China alone, our capability is very limited. So we welcome more to join in in the interest of, I think, all parties.
This is a very optimistic way to end a panel that maybe was being a bit provocative in saying we see some real strategic rivalry in this Belt and Road Initiative. And I think there are legitimate questions about transparency and the rules-based order. But like you said, and I think, Karim, you said it too, one of the great and unintended consequences of Belt and Road Initiative is other countries starting to reinvigorate their own infrastructure investment. Because like you said, Councillor Guo, China can't do it alone. The world needs a lot of infrastructure investment and a lot of financing for these projects. And so I think if we are going to be positive about this, this does offer an opportunity for us. We're out of time, but let's have one final question in the back.
Just curious to hear from the panel, which of the projects do you think have the most economic logic, and which of the projects do you think have the least economic benefit? Because that's really one of the #1 questions on investors' minds.
I think Karim and Ekaterina, you're the two who are really equipped to answer that.
Well, out of those that are, for example, under tender right now, of course, Bakat-Almaty Ring Road, of course, Almaty Light Rail, Almaty Rail Bypass, I'm not sure it makes economic sense for investors, but again, it depends on the final support from the government. There is potential in the airport sector in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. If these projects are PPP'd, they're very good for investors. because if, again, the airport sector, it's a bit self-financed. Roads and railways, they would need support from the government, availability payment schemes for PPPs.
I am being directed to wrap up, so I'm going to ask Karim, please, to go directly to the back of the room on your way to the closing plenary to answer your question. And just take this minute to say thank you to my fellow panelists, and we are all being directed to the closing plenary. Thank you.